From Dumfries and Galloway, Laura Moodie and Dominic Ashmole, who stood for a Borders Council seat in May. I began by asking Ms Moodie how the Greens can grow support in the south of Scotland.
Well, I think we've seen growing support in the whole of the south of Scotland, and that's been really, really gratifying. Obviously in Dumfries and Galloway we didn't quite get over the line, but we saw a gigantic increase in our vote across the board. Even in areas where we'd never really stood a candidate before, we came very close to getting over the line. And I think that's because people have seen what we do in our communities. People have seen the effective campaigns we've had against peat extraction, looking at public transport, and they're seeing the difference Greens are making in government with free bus travel, for example.
The party's very clear at this conference now about its support for independence for Scotland. Could that potentially be a problem for you locally? Because we know that in the last referendum, right across the south of Scotland, the supporters of staying in the United Kingdom outnumbered those who wanted to leave by about 2/3 to 1/3.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're having a national debate there, aren't we? And if the referendum does go ahead, there'll be a lot more discussion about that. I think what people probably are starting to feel and think is that given the real, true emergency nature of what we face with climate and nature, and the timescales for that, which are take action this year, this decade, or face consequences that cannot be unravelled in time, they will be looking to see what government actually is going to take the necessary action. And if they don't see Westminster doing that, in fact they see Tories throwing their limited environmental credentials under the bus, we have to make a choice. A small nation, an independent and agile nation, maybe is what we need in order to save our skins.
But if there's still similar opinion in the south of Scotland, obviously we don't know because it hasn't been tested, but if there is, could there not be people who like what you stand for in terms of the environment, action on the climate crisis, but are perhaps at the best unsure about the idea of independence? How do you talk to them? How do you attract them?
Well, there's definitely work to be done in explaining the reasons for our support for independence and why we think that will help us to tackle the climate crisis. As Dominic said, the current disastrous Tory government in Westminster is helping to make the case for us in terms of throwing out environmental regulations. But I think for the whole of the South Scotland, we felt neglected for a long time by both Westminster and Holyrood. So it's about making the case for what independence can mean in communities and what that can mean about the influence we could have if all the powers that we need are brought back and closer to home. But that's about listening as well as speaking. It's not just telling people what we believe, it's about having those conversations in our communities and really listening to people, because we know it's going to be an uphill struggle in the south of Scotland, but we're prepared for that and we think we can make a compelling case.
What about the issue of transport? We spend a lot of time reporting on transport issues. Many people in the south of Scotland would argue that to provide a better transport system in the south of Scotland, you need to invest more in roads. In your part of the world, perhaps the A1, in your part of the world, the A75 and the A77. Are they right, or are there alternatives?
Well, our roads are in a poor state of repair, and I fully support the proper maintenance of our roads. I live near Peebles, where there's a vast commuter traffic by car in and out on a daily basis to Edinburgh. And we need to invest in transport, but in the context of climate and in the context of the vast social and economic changes that are required in order not to have outcomes we don't want, we need public transport, and we need to prioritise bus and rail services such that car is not a subsidised, cheaper, more convenient option. That change has to happen, and therefore the priority has to be for bus services in my area.
But can you do that in a large, very rural area like Dumfries and Galloway? Will there ever be enough bus services? Will there ever be enough train services? You need roads, don't you?
We have roads. We already have
a good road. But they're not good enough, people say.
Well, they're not well maintained, but certainly in the case of the A75, it's very hard to make the case that that road really needs dualled. And especially when you look at the cost differentials, it costs about a third less to build a mile of rail as it does a mile of dual carriageway. And I think what people really need to see is radical solutions that will properly connect our communities. A new rail line, which we've campaigned for a long time, linking up Dumfries, Carlisle to Stranraer would make a huge difference to the region, and it would also take a lot of freight off the road, so it would benefit communities, benefit tourism, benefit business, as well as reducing carbon emissions, and we have to grasp that nettle and take that chance.
Laura Moodie and Dominic Ashmole, thank you very much.